but also seems like it could be worked out. So King, I want to ask, should practices as they are now in most of the Pac-12 schools remain closed to the media?
From a health perspective, perhaps, but I think you could do this in a safe and healthy manner. I think you can do it with social distancing. I mean, you look at Stanford practices, they're not very crowded. Sometimes it's you, me, and 2 or 3 other guys, and that's it in the huddle around David Shaw. You could do that with more spacing. Obviously, everyone wears masks. And obviously, maybe you limit availability on any given day. You have to apply for a credential to go to practice. That's an obvious change you could make. But it seems to me like they are taking advantage of the chance to limit information on the program, which frankly is, based on what I've seen from David Shaw and his coaching staff, that's something they like to do. They do not want to be forthcoming with the media or the public, and I understand that. They are trying to run a program. They don't need outside noise. But I've always thought if David Shaw was in the SEC, he would despise it. He would hate it every second and leave immediately because he does not like that kind of scrutiny on his program. Not so much that he can't take it personally. He's got thick skin, but he does not like all the questions. He does not like all the media hoopla. And so I think that this was a good chance for, not saying he's taking advantage of COVID, but it was a good chance for him to orchestrate the kind of media relations he would like to. And obviously the Pac-12 made that decision for him. So my guess is that media could cover practices safely. And so I wish that we were able to do that, because more than ever, we need media on the ground to not only, see how these teams are doing, but more importantly, see how these coaches are treating the situation. See if they are maintaining a safe and healthy environment for their players. If you don't have outside eyes peering into your program, then the only thing we're getting is the test results, if those are even released. And so those might tell a bad story, but there could be a lot more going on underneath the surface that you really can't tell unless you have media getting into practice and getting close to the program.
You went a lot there, King, and I have to say I agree with all of it. Hard to say on this show, I know, but yeah, no, the Pac-12 also just needs eyes in general, right? Coverage breeds coverage, and the Pac-12 is hurting for viewership. Why wouldn't they have people telling these stories? And I think Ken Rosenthal about baseball talked about it in the spring with you want the reporters in the locker room telling these stories because that's what gets people coming back to baseball. Same thing with football. If we're able to tell the stories of these players, then the fans are going to get attached to them. Then they're going to be watching. The Pac-12 network is hurting for so long. The Pac-12 hasn't had viewers. Stanford hasn't had viewers. Why wouldn't you want your media there? And the Zoom press conferences are fine. That's okay. I fully support being able to raise my hand on Zoom and have Scott and Tyler help me out there. If Scott and Tyler, if you're listening, I love you. You're the best SIDs in the conference, without a doubt. But why can't we be there with binoculars at a distance, seeing how the tackling is going, seeing, as you mentioned, if the protocols are being followed? Because that's why we have media. We have that fourth estate to keep checks and balances on all these things. And I totally understand them wanting to keep things separate. But David Shaw, and you mentioned this, has that thick skin, but also will readily make jokes. In the first press conference, he definitely made a comment to RJ about that article he wrote, accusing them of all the Miller Moore stuff. So he will engage with the media, and I agree that he's probably taken this opportunity to take a little bit of pressure off the program after a 4-8 season, right, where people are upset, maybe want to talk to him and a little bit more. But I personally think having media at your practices is a good thing. Pete Carroll famously had an open practice in Los Angeles for a long time. Anyone could be there. I understand not having fans there. That makes sense. But having limited media and able to cover your team better to get you more viewership to help your team in the future seems like a no-brainer to me.
This is something that's happening around the country. I mean, if you listen to, SEC beat reporters, they're also saying that, yes, they might get some access to practice, but not nearly as much as they usually would. They would usually be inside the team building all the time. Now they're never getting inside the team building and rarely getting a chance to go to practice. But you're exactly right. More than ever, we need media scrutiny of all levels of society, and we need media to tell great stories that humanize athletes and coaches. And that's something that I had a great class with Gary Pomerantz, a sports writing legend. And one of the things we talked about a lot is how access to players and coaches has decreased dramatically over the last few decades. And that's leading to less, illustrious reporting than we've seen in the past. You simply cannot, paint a picture of an athlete nearly as well if you're not able to actually be around that athlete on a daily basis and see how they operate beyond just when they've got their public relations, their PR face on, because everybody has a different persona when they get in front of the camera, when they know they're in front of the camera. That's what made a documentary like The Last Dance so special, is that it peeled back the curtain and you could see what these guys, MJ and many others on the legendary 90s Bulls, were like when those cameras were turned off, except for the cameras that were allowed to be there. And so that is something that we're missing this year. And I think it's something that the Pac-12 is just a difference between most Pac-12 schools and the rest of the country in general, is that there's less media coverage. So you kind of have to do the bare minimum. You got to write your game recaps. You got to write your previews. You got to, do the occasional feature story or rundown, but you can't do the same level of in-depth reporting, because think about RJ. He's a staff of one. Think about Jacob. He's a staff of one. And shout out to both of those guys, and big shout out to Tyler and Scott and all of the Stanford communications department, because they are wonderful. But like I said, one-man band can't do nearly as much as, a dedicated team of reporters. And, the Pac-12 got a lot of negative PR to cover up. And we'll hope they can do it on the field, but at the very least, it would have been helpful if they could do it in the papers as well.
Absolutely. You get content by having better content. That's how you get the people to come and participate in your product, to buy your gear, to watch the games, to support the program, whatever it looks like. It's because all of these people ask, are you safe, humanized? And right now, the Pac-12 overall, and especially Stanford, is hurting for that. So they should absolutely do everything in their power to encourage people to be able to cover their program, because they're doing so many great things, right? They have Cardinal Black, which is a student athlete group that is making strides in the community. They should have someone who's able to highlight that effectively, right? All of these different things that you think they'd want to have people cover, it seems like we're not getting that same access. And yeah, like you said with The Last Dance, same thing with, if you think about the Boys of Summer, right? That baseball book, where they were able to profile all those players on the Dodgers, the 50s, in so much depth, because the writer had, Roger Kahn, had built up all of those relationships. And exactly, that's what you need. You need relationships, because it shouldn't be a reporter coming in there twice a week, sticking their microphone into a player's face and saying, what do you think is going to happen next week? That's not helpful. That's not what fans want. That's not what anybody wants to read. What's helpful is having real access to real players, humanizing them, telling great stories. That's what people want. And again, really wish that it could happen this year. And then I don't want this year, even if it's COVID, to continue into the next years, if that makes sense. I don't want these more restrict protocols to be able to be allowed to continue, because I think it'll really hurt the content moving forward.
Absolutely right. And my impression is that it probably won't, but we just never know when things are going to get even close to back to normal. But an interesting side effect of this is, more so than ever, we have no idea what we're going to see in the first game of the season. And I think we saw some crazy results if you look back to the first weeks of football elsewhere. I mean, think about Mississippi State over LSU. We talked about that at length because of KJ Costello. Well, KJ just got benched in the past game, and his time as a starter may be done. But that was a result nobody could have seen coming. And now, looking at it a few weeks later, it looks even stranger. We don't know what's going to happen week one. We haven't seen this Stanford team on the field. We haven't seen their Oregon opponent on the field in a spring game scenario or in a media access practice scenario. So the first chance we get to see these guys is going to be on the field in Autzen Stadium on November 7th. I could not be more excited, could not be more nervous, but I do think that honestly bodes well for a team like Stanford, that they're a wild card this season. We just don't know. Other coaches don't know. And I think hopefully David Shaw and Tavita Pritchard and this offensive coaching staff have done some working in the lab to create a little bit more dynamic and different Stanford offense that highlights Davis Mills' strengths and the strengths of his wide receiver core. And maybe we're going to see a Stanford team that comes out with a really potent offense that, maybe not something that we would have gotten in the same way if we'd had media, if we had spring game, and if we'd known about it all along. So that's what I'm hoping for. That's the bright side, is that David Shaw is going to go out and throw. Davis Mills, under David Shaw's direction, is going to go out and throw for 500 yards in Austin on Saturday the 7th.
That would be great.